Okay. There are no late items, no receipt of petitions, no identification of urgent items to which calling will not apply. There's none that apply there. Declarations of interest from anyone? Councillor Kerr.
I'd just like to mention that I'm on the Planning Control Committee, and if I am making any comments about the Infinity Park, I'm not prejudging the situation in any way.
Councillor Whitby, please.
It seems appropriate to say that I'm a Derby City Council foster carer, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 6, minutes of the meeting held on 5th of October. Okay, so we are happy to accept that as a true record. Okay, they're moved. Okay, seconded. Yeah, so Cabinet agree. Okay, thank you. Right, 7 recommendations for corporate scrutiny and governance. I'll take the bulk of them in turn as and when they apply on key decisions, but there is one that's not on the key decisions that was discussed at overview scrutiny, and that was in regards to homelessness performance update. I wonder if Councillor Afzal would just like, Councillor Hussain would just like to introduce that as the appropriate Cabinet member that attended the session.
Thank you, Chair. We had a very interesting and very fruitful debate on the causes of homelessness and what steps could be taken by the Council to alleviate the problem. The Scrutiny Commission Board have recommended a series of recommendations which are listed under 1, 2, 3 and 4, and I'm quite happy to accept all 4 of them. I think they will take us somewhere near us sorting the difficulties which people are experiencing with homelessness if and when we have implemented them in full. But I can't see any reason for us not to accept the recommendations in full.
Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations as put forward by Councillor Hussain. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item number 8, recruitment and retention of foster carers topic review. Councillor Whitby, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very happy to be here to present the recommendations of the Inspiring Young People's Board. We've been doing this review now for the best part of a year, and I need to thank Councillor Kerr in particular and Councillor Hesselgrave, who've been with me on all the witness interviews we've done. And the 26 recommendations, Chair, I'm not going to go through them all now, but I'll just pick a few out. As I said, I am a foster carer, and for that reason, for the last few years, I've been hesitant to do any sort of review into fostering services. I wouldn't want anyone to think that I've got some sort of axe to grind, but the time seems appropriate. We've done various things in terms of marketing strategies in recent years, the Empower in particular recently. Unfortunately, the performance in terms of getting new foster carers through the door is still on the decline, and the number of deregistrations is still on the increase. Therefore, we just felt we needed to do something else, to look at something else, and that's what we've got, 26 recommendations. Number 3 and 4 are very much together, reviewing the marketing strategy, increasing the marketing budget, and putting that budget under the control of the fostering team. That all sounds pretty obvious things to do, but certainly at the time of the interviews that wasn't where we were. The actual budget we found was £26,000. Now, you know, potentially the savings we could make if we can bring people through the door, it just doesn't quite seem adequate despite the enormous pressures we're under. So we're not putting a figure on that, but we're just looking to get an increase, but bring it in-house. And also spend some money on social media, making our presence on social media much more obvious. You know, we are very much up against the private sector in this regard. And of course, you know, it's been in the national press in recent times that there's independent fostering agencies offering golden hellos of £3,000. We are up against it. And that leads us on to recommendation 7, which was the one that we agonised over the most, certainly the wording of which we agonised over the most. Because we are up against the private sector and they are being very aggressive. The very least that we felt we could do is be very, very upfront with our potential foster carers to say that, yes, there will be fostering allowances paid. It seems far too difficult to actually find out if they'll ever actually receive any money if you go on the website. So this was a big deal, really. It's got to be pretty obvious. A difficult thing for the staff to work through how they're going to do this. But yeah, that's the recommendation 7. That's quite an important part of this whole thing. 10 and 11, again, sort of go together. This was about increasing the specific data captured throughout the recruitment pathway. If people come to us and it doesn't turn into an approval, we sort of need to know why people aren't going ahead. We don't capture any data. What we heard from Bernardo's was that some people think about becoming a foster carer for several years, and it would be very, very helpful if we could capture some data as to why they're not progressing, and maybe, you know, if we're allowed to keep their details, contact them again 2 or 3 years down the line, we may well get some joy out of that. So that's quite a key one. Recommendation 12 is ensure that the length of time, this is pretty much a topic review in itself, I apologise for this one, but ensure that the length of time from first contact to conversion is not more than 6 months. I mean, it seems fairly vacuous that, but you know, it's such a big deal. We've interviewed some people who took nearly 2 years to become approved. If we could get anywhere near 6 months, it'll increase our capacity. It'd be very, very helpful all round. We're nowhere near that as an average at the moment. Recommendation 15, treat foster carers as valuable professionals who provide an essential service to children. Derby and the council. This really comes from the sort of thing people tell us, a bit of an attitude sometimes. You know, we don't want social workers to treat foster carers in any other way than what they are, which is a valuable resource. I'll say no more than that. What else we got? 16 is about social workers being proactive about offering additional fees rather than requiring a foster carer to evidence just the challenges a child presents. Additional fees should not be, should be seen as an entitlement. The process I find, and I think other carers find, a bit unwieldy. You'd like to think social workers would know the evidence, and we're asking that really the process is much more in-house rather than driven by the foster carers. 17 is make counselling easily available for all children in care, removing the requirement for foster carers having to seek approval through social workers. I'm not aware of any child in care that's there for a good reason. They're all damaged to some extent, and I think I'm not the first person to suggest this, but they could all benefit from counselling. 18 is ensure that the therapeutic unit at Leopold Street remains open. This is fairly indulgent, I'm afraid, Chair, and there's nothing that I've heard to suggest it won't remain open. I just want it to be in black and white that we will. I know that service users and foster carers value the service tremendously, and I'm very grateful it's still open and hopefully will remain so. And I think I'm going to leave it there. Obviously there's 26 of them, and I sort of commend them to the Cabinet Member. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Whitby. A lot of important work's gone into that, so we're grateful. Any questions, contributions from anyone? Yes, Councillor Bolton, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I first of all thank Councillor Whitby and his fellow councillors who helped put together this very informative, and I know a lot of work went into compiling this report, hence the timescale involved. Can I start off by saying that all our foster carers are valued? Listening to Councillor Whitby's contribution a few moments ago, where he alluded to perhaps they don't feel valued, I can assure you the 164 foster carers we have on our books at the moment are valued. I have written to all of them personally to thank them for the service they give to our vulnerable children in the city, and indeed the challenging issues that they have to face on a day-to-day basis. Furthermore, I have organised my own coffee mornings with the Mayor's permission, and also we're having a Christmas tea afternoon, inviting them in as well. And I also attend the presentation evenings. So I don't think a month goes by where I'm not interacting in some form with our foster carers and indeed the Children in Care Council to speak to them personally. So let me just deal with the issue that John raised a few moments ago. I think he was referring to recommendation 15. All our foster carers in Derby are valued, and that will continue to be the case. The other thing I'd like to say is that obviously because this report goes back just over a year, some of these recommendations have already been implemented, and I'm very pleased to be telling Cabinet that this evening. Recommendation 1, that has been agreed and it has been in action for some time. Recommendation 5, we are increasing our links and we're always looking for innovative ways of doing so. But we do interact with Derby Homes, the National Health Service, Homes for Good, the school circulars we use, our own In Touch, and of course our own employees. We never miss an opportunity. Going on to recommendation 7, yeah, I mean, it's all about the children or the child involved. We don't particularly look at the fee situation, but primarily it is what is best for the child and children. And of course, we will act appropriately. The recommendation 6, I can actually say that I have actually witnessed us using foster carers as advocates. I, for several years now, have attended the Big One Carnival on Chaddesden Park. And throughout the time I spend during that day, I always try and spend at least an hour on our foster care stall. So I go there and praise the service, try and encourage more participation. And that is where I meet not only the social workers, but our foster carers as well. So we already do include them in any promotions or any additional issues to highlight the service. We use the in-house because that's the best. They can tell their life story, they can tell what they get out of fostering, and it's always better to hear it from a foster carer through them when you're speaking to the public. So some of these issues we are already addressing. Recommendation 8, have a dedicated officer to work on recruitment. That's been in operation since December 2014. And that is proving very, very successful. Recommendation 9, yes, we've agreed that in principle already. Recommendation 11 is in place already. Recommendation 13, it's in place already. A lot of this work obviously needs some further investigation where there are financial implications, and clearly with the budget situation we need to look very carefully at that. But what I have promised Councillor Whitby, rather than going through the whole 27 recommendations, I will have a meeting with him individually, and then I'm more than willing to go along to his committee and actually talk about each recommendation where there is action ongoing. Some, as I've said, have already been carried out, but there is some more work going, and I'd like to probably spend more time on it with Councillor Whitby and his fellow colleagues so we can have a more meaningful discussion and perhaps take longer than we've got now, Chair. But as I started, I will thank again Councillor Whitby and his fellow colleagues who've put this together, and rest assured recommendations have been implemented, are being implemented, are indeed being investigated. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Repton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, foster carers are an invaluable resource that the City Council has, and As an ex-social worker who started my career working originally in fostering and adoption, I know that the challenges that there are in terms of recruiting and retaining foster carers. I do welcome the 27 recommendations. They are challenging, especially in these difficult financial times, and I know Sarah and Andy and the rest of his department will be looking very closely and wanting to implement as many of those as possible, as quickly as possible. On a lighter note, I see on page 14, word of mouth, 5 key target groups are identified: churches, schools, NHS, Duffield and Darley Abbey. That's very interesting. Representing Darley Abbey, I realise that, that it's recognised that the area that myself and Lisa represents is sort of the area where we get people with values and we'll put their names forward. It's interesting that Alistair in between was missed out. I'm curious as to why you've focused on those particular areas, Chair, but that's half tongue-in-cheek, but it is worthy of an answer. But certainly I do welcome the report. Some excellent amount of effort has gone in to raise these issues, and I'm sure we'll rise to the challenges. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kerr, please.
Yeah, as Councillor Whitby said, it's been a really interesting time doing this review, and I think we need to give thanks, and I think they're included in here, not just to ourselves doing our job, but also to the foster carers and the staff who gave their time and their experience of this as well. I think the thing that struck me most was how enthusiastic the foster carers are about the role they do. Yes, there were frustrations, but the satisfaction that those that we spoke to got from being able to turn around children who had a really difficult background and be able to see the difference that they were making is what motivates them to go on. And that's the sort of expertise that we need to spread more widely in society. Because then using those skills, not just within that child, but any other children they get to come into contact with, they will be a good influence in our communities. And that was really the point of recommendation 6, is that it's not just our foster carers, but it's lots of other people who can also enthuse about foster carers, including people who are now adult, but who themselves went through the foster care process. If we can get their expertise and get their enthusiasm into this, or people who don't have a suitable house or lifestyle, to enable them to be foster carers themselves but are still enthusiastic advocates, we need to get them on board as well as our foster carers who have a lot on their shoulders already. We've also, we were being really pleased when we came up with the draft things and we talked with staff about these. And the number, as Councillor Bolton has said, the number of recommendations that are already being looked at and taken forward by the staff, and I think that is really good as well. But we clearly have a lot more that we can be doing, and I think it's something that the further discussions are going to be really useful, not just over the next 6 months, but over the next year, 2 years and onwards. I have high hopes for it, but it's going to continue to need a lot of attention.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Kerr's made a really good suggestion. I think if Councillor Bolton, if you haven't already done so, if you could write a letter, I think it might be a good idea writing a letter to the foster carers, thanking them for their feedback from yourself as Cabinet Member. Okay. Any other questions, contributions from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Show of hands, please. Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 9, Councillor Shanker, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Communities, Environment and Regulatory Services Department are responsible for enforcing a wide range of legislation encompassing environmental protection, food, health and safety, private sector housing, trading standards and licensing. These services are important to ensure the health, safety and welfare of residents, visitors and the business community, as well as the wider environment. An enforcement policy sets out what businesses and others being regulated can expect from a regulatory service. The policy should reflect good enforcement practice with effective procedures and clear policies, in particular the requirements set out in the Regulator's Code. It should also promote consistency, fairness, I'll try to slow down, and transparency, which improve regulatory outcomes without imposing unnecessary burdens. Periodic revisions are necessary to ensure the policy is up to date and a revised Communities, Environment and Regulatory Services Enforcement Policy is set out in Appendix 2 of the report. I ask Cabinet to approve the revised enforcement policy. Thank you, Chair.
I know that's caused a bit of amusement. You were talking to the Chair and the Chair wasn't there, but I was listening to everything you were saying. So I can assure you it was council business I was discussing with Councillor Kerr. So, okay, so any questions or contributions for anyone? No, Councillor Holmes, please.
Just a quick one, Chair. I think it would be useful for future reports where there's a policy revised, if there was a simple way to actually have those revisions sort of noted in some way so we could see them as part of the report brought to Cabinet. It's the only comment I'd make. It's just can be difficult sometimes to work out what's changed or what's been revised or updated in the report, Chair.
Okay, so thank you for that feedback. Any questions or further contributions for anyone? Okay, so yeah, so move the recommendations are moved. Can I have a Cabinet show of hand, please? Thank you. That's approved. Agenda item number 10, Councillor Afzal, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Review of school crossing patrol budget savings. We've seen unprecedented cuts to local government. I mean, from the Tory government. They expect us to make savings for discretionary services, but obviously it's not as easy as that. So, having spoken to local children, their parents, local councillors, we have a difficult decision to make. It's great being in power, but the responsibility that comes with it, and one of those responsibilities is actually setting a balanced budget, and we try to set a balanced budget. It's like with CCTV cameras, we had issues and problems, but we found alternative ways of funding, and we tried similar things, but nobody's willing to come forward. And morally, I think it's the wrong thing to do, and I think it's important, Chair, that you engage, well, we should all engage with powers that be, our local MPs, and say this should actually be a statutory service, because our children, they do matter. So the only way we can actually try to find the savings is from the bus companies, from people who are travelling. But in order for us to do that, we obviously have to have a consultation. So I'll just go straight into the recommendation 2.1 and 2.2, please, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I note that the scrutiny has recommended to look at, I suppose, a wider review really as concessionary fares. I think it's probably a fair interpretation of what they have brought to Cabinet and you've accepted. But on the Red Arrow and the X38 specifically, am I right in thinking that those two are being looked at because there's potentially another route which may be longer or take longer but would still be a concessionary fare? Was that the logic behind these two being looked at as potentially to be changed?
Thank you, Chair. I think the logic is to look at the level of provision of these services. So the Red Arrow and X38 are providing a higher level of service. So they are kind of coach-type facilities. They don't have as many stops as an ordinary service, and therefore they're considered to be in a different classification, and therefore the concessionary fares scheme doesn't necessarily apply, and that's what we're consulting on. So as it happens, there are alternative provision, but actually the decision is whether we believe that service is something that's not contained within the national scheme, and therefore the concession doesn't have to be paid on that route. Yeah.
Is it the Red Arrow? I can't remember which one it is. That currently we offer concessionary fare, but the Nottingham Authority doesn't. Which one is that?
Yes, it's the Red Arrow. It was last year or the year before when Nottingham City reviewed this, and they withdrew the concession on the Red Arrow. So somebody going from Derby to Nottingham gets a concession on their route back from Nottingham to Derby. They have to pay the fare.
Councillor Kerr, please.
Just following neatly on from there, I presume there should be some indication, since Nottingham have made that change, as to whether there are fewer people now using the Red Arrow with their concession, knowing that they've been having to pay for half the journey, if they're assuming they're doing a return journey, compared to before Nottingham made that change. And I was wondering whether that information had actually been used to estimate the reduction from 300,000 to 150,000, because it's partly implemented. And there's no reference to that in here, and I just wondered whether officers had actually used a comparison, year-on-year comparison for that purpose. And if not, then it might be a way of actually gleaning a bit more accuracy into a figure rather than saying sort of 50% maybe. And the other question I had was regarding the paragraph 2.5. The paragraph numbering seems to be in a slightly strange order, but this is on page 6. And it says, as the original decision to cut school crossing patrols was taken by full council, any decision to reverse this cut needs to be taken by Cabinet. And I just wondered whether that was actually correct or not. So I just wondered why it was the point of making that statement, because we would normally expect Cabinet to be making budgetary decisions.
Jane, do you want to answer that one? Then I'll hand back to Christine.
Thank you, Chair. Full Council approves the budget that Cabinet set. Therefore, the final decision about this was left with Full Council. In order to reverse that, the matter comes back to the overarching decision-making body, which is Cabinet. It's budget-related, and therefore it's Cabinet that make the decision. So in the budgetary process, Cabinet set the budget, send it to Full Council for approval. It's approved by Full Council, and therefore it has to come back to Cabinet to override that decision, because Cabinet is the executive decision-making function in respect of the budget. So it is correct, yes.
Leave me, Councillor Kerr, the process is exactly the same as to when you were deputy leader. So you kind of look confused there. So I just want to let you know we haven't changed anything. Believe me, we followed the same process. So,
Chair,
I appreciate it's been a number of years because you obviously had a bit of a break. You weren't on the council. So.
No, I had a gap, a 4-year gap.
You
get sort of, not as everything just at the forefront of your brain. The other point I forgot to mention was under 5.1, which is on page 4, which says this report considers a range of options. They're not pulled out anywhere as a range of options, and it wasn't clear to me what options were going to be considered, particularly in terms of funding school crossing patrols, if there is a very strong reaction. What other alternative is being considered than looking at the X38 and the Red Arrow? Because I couldn't see another option being considered.
If I can answer the 2 points that you made. I think in relation to the latter point, I think when it says it considers a range of options, I think it just does mean it's considered the routes that are there, and we believe that the X38 and the Red Arrow are the options we should consult on. In relation to your reference about the 300,000 and how have we come to 150,000 estimate essentially to cover, my understanding is that the estimated cost of the subsidy on the Red Arrow is 300,000 the last time we measured it, but that was when it also went to Chesterfield. So it wasn't just about we have a cost sharing arrangement with Derbyshire on how we split up the concessionary fares. So I think the estimate of 300,000 is genuinely an estimate of more than just what has happened in the small elements of Derby. So I think we're nervous about saying it's definitely going to cover up to 300,000, because obviously then we would be looking to put that additional saving into the budget. So I think it's I think we're just trying to be prudent to say we expect it that it will cover this 150. Once we've done some further work and done some further analysis, then I think we'll have a better idea on that.
Anything else, Councillor Kerr?
Well, I was just wondering whether your bus was still running an express bus service, and whether we're going to build in any other mention of any other express bus services in general, rather than specifically talking about just 2 by name.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of your bus. What the legislation is around is whether this is a service that is over and above. So some of the provision is about the fact that on the Red Arrow in particular, this is a coach service, so therefore you get a higher level of provision than you might expect on a more traditional bus service. So I don't know whether your bus comes into that category, but I can go away and ask the question.
Anything else, Councillor Kerr? You sure? Okay. Councillor Bolton, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to support the statement when Councillor Afzal introduced his report regarding making school crossing patrols a statutory service. I think it's appalling that it isn't a statutory service, and you'll see under the legal paragraph 2.1 that it clearly isn't at the moment. And I think it's incumbent on us all to write to all our local MPs to ensure that this is a statutory service. Surely the safety of all our children travelling to school is of paramount importance to us as local councillors, and it's something that I think clearly we ought to move forward on. It's all our responsibilities, perhaps under a safeguarding role as well, to ensure that they all arrive at school promptly and safely. So I'd like to support what the Cabinet Member has outlined in his introduction.
Okay, thank you. It is unfortunate that we have to, again, probably have to remind, not necessarily ourselves as a Labour administration, but you know, a lot of people out there, that this is the 6th year of austerity as national government policy. Cuts in public spending. This government, the previous government, but the same party that's in power in 2010 embarked on a national policy to cut public spending. Let's not forget the speeches George Osborne made about taking public spending back to the levels of the 1930s, very bombastically. It's not surprising that he's been quietly moved aside, but government policy has not changed. The autumn statement will be the first evidence of that. We are still in danger zone. Local government, public services are in that state of affairs generally. In particular the case of this City Council, again, let's deal with the facts. Whoever would have been in power would have to deal with the same numbers. Prior to the budget we've just set a 3-year budget of £45 million savings. Previous to that, it was £116 million. Now, there are some naysayers out there, people that distort the truth for their own political egos. Personally, I think they lead very sad lives and find themselves on social media in that environment. But the reality is, the facts are the facts and the numbers are the numbers. So whether it was us sitting here and all the Conservatives, all the Liberal Democrats, the numbers weren't going to change. We've just set a budget, as I said, £45 million, and this proposal that we took to full council in an attempt to balance that budget did involve a raft of decisions which, under normal circumstances, we would not be taking as a Labour administration. That is a fact. But when you're put in a position to deliver savings to the magnitude that this government has demanded of us, that does mean, sadly, tragically, cuts in services. It's easy for the opposition to say the things they do, and actually I've spoken to a Conservative leader who said about the Conservative group here, well, they will say that, they're in opposition. Anybody can say anything they want in opposition. And in some ways that's maybe that's their job. But what I find really tragic and disappointing is there's no intelligent, well thought out, viable alternatives. To simply stand on the sides and to say, well, actually, you shouldn't do that. And then not offer any intelligent, professional, thought out response, I think is giving up your powers as an elected member. Because anybody can do that. I mean, any member of the public can actually not be elected, and actually they do. Some of them sit in the gallery. And to be honest with you, you can actually forgive them for that. But when councillors themselves put themselves forward for election and turn up at this chamber and attack any offer, any proposal put forward by the administration, then offer any viable alternative, well, that's just simply a cop-out. You know, it's a complete, actually does a huge disservice to the role of elected members. We do want to work cross-party with all parties to look at alternative ways, but sadly that's not been forthcoming. The one positive we have found is we took a revised motion on the Fair Deal for Derby campaign to challenge government so we can get a fair deal to fight for fair funding so we could keep valuable public services functioning in our city. And credit to the Liberal Democrats and UKIP that have come to the support of that. The Conservatives haven't. And what I find really, really appalling out of this whole situation, and it'd be laughable if it wasn't so tragic in its consequences, was the Conservatives who nationally support cuts in public spending, locally complain about the consequences of them. Now think about that for a minute. To argue 1 minute that actually, yes, public services need to be cut and public spending should be cut, and vote that way, and then turn up at the council chamber arguing the complete opposite. Again, that's just absolutely doesn't make sense. Clearly, there's a big job to be done with convincing the public. You know, the public don't see that. The media do their job. They want hits on their thing, and that's their job to do that. But what it sadly does, it distorts the impression the public get. And whether that's, you could roll into that, you know, the fact that the message isn't getting through about the consequences of cuts in public spending. You could argue about the consequences of Brexit, and we've got Donald Trump, God help us, now. You know, the reality is the message isn't getting through, you know. And we're accused of actually always complaining about government cuts. The reality is we are where we are now, and we as an administration are trying to find a way forward. This is good news in the sense that we have prioritised. We've made that difficult choice. To be honest with you, I'd love to be in a position where people can go between Derby and Nottingham in the way they have been and not incur a charge. But if we've been presented with a kind of Hobson's choice in this way, and we have chosen. We've prioritised making sure children in our city can continue to cross the road safely. And it is an appalling state of affairs that government doesn't deem that service a legally binding service for councils to provide. What we're saying here, this is an important service for us. We are going to save it. We are going to, in our mind, make it a statutory service, and we're asking, you know, our colleagues across parties to support us in a campaign to lobby government to make this a statutory service. Because when we met Marcus Jones in Parliament, one of the key things the civil servant said, well, actually, you can balance, you know, because you can get rid of all these services. You don't have to legally provide them. They're not red lines for the government. All the government wants to see councils do is to deliver a balanced budget. They don't care about the consequences of local services. That's where they're coming from. We effectively want to be able to say to government, well, the reason we haven't, Minister, the reason we've come to you now, you know, and we haven't cut school crossing patrol services because that's a red line for us. It's just simply unthinkable. I wish we could apply it to a lot of other services, but the reality, we are where we are. I kind of just, you know, I thought I had to just get that off my chest because, you know, we are in this place at the moment where there are people like just simply austerity deniers for whatever reason. I mean, they're bizarre, I think. I mean, they're living in cloud cuckoo land. And again, there's a lot of individuals, they must lead sad individual lives, really. You know, they might want to get out a bit and kind of go for a drink at the pub with their mates or something. But, well, they lead the lives they do. But the reality is there's no getting away from the facts. And if they want to isolate Derby and say it's just Derby, well, they can all speak to John Collins. They can go and interview the Conservative leaders that we often meet at various and talk to them about the challenges and the pressures they're facing. I sat down with John Clancy, the leader of Birmingham. Just see the situation they're in, having to sell massive assets because they're practically bankrupt as a council as a result of job evaluation, as a result of the equal pay situation they faced. You look at the situation Nottingham now going to go through around, it's been reported in the East Midlands News, around looking at staff terms and conditions. The list is endless. But to face the fact there are people in this council chamber, you know, out there in the public that just simply want to deny that exists. That somehow Derby is living in a different planet to everybody else. I think they're living in a different planet, to be frank with you. So we are where we are. You know, we will continue to do the job to the best of our abilities and passionately protect the services that we think are important. And I think, to be frank with you, I'm proud of the job we've done and we are continuing to do. This is another a really good example of how we're protecting a valuable service. So, you know, I want to thank the Cabinet member, the Cabinet for really, because I know a lot of time was spent on this, we did a lot of soul searching on this, but we have found a way of protecting a very valuable service. And yes, we've embarked on a consultation to look at an alternative. I wish we didn't have to do that, but the answer comes back to this thing again. If we want to provide all these services, they've got to be properly funded. The money's not going to come, you know, grow on a tree. The reality is we are reliant on government funding. And therein lies the answer. We've got to get together and on a combined campaign, and I come back to this thing about the Conservatives, they've got to change their position, this laughable position of supporting cuts in public spending nationally, but then complaining about the consequences of the cuts on a local level. It just does not make sense. It does not make sense. Please tell me, how can that be possible? It just, it's almost like saying you won't put fuel in a car, but then you'll complain when the car doesn't move. I mean, anyway, I clearly struggle with that concept that the Conservatives find themselves in, but maybe they sit around and clearly explain it to themselves and feel pleased about it. This is good news. Let's embark on this campaign, and I know Councillor Afzal will be will be talking about it at full council. And again, I don't want to steal his thunder on that, and so cross-party will get an opportunity to talk further about it. So, before I put this to Cabinet, it's worth just reading out the recommendation from overview scrutiny, because it was discussed there. And maybe this does give us a bit of hope, because obviously overview scrutiny is a cross-party group. And I quote, "The board were in support of the proposals to maintain school crossings to ensure child safety, and recommended to Council Cabinet that the possibility of further savings to be looked at through the concessionary fares scheme." So that's a really big endorsement from our colleagues on overview scrutiny. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report and to accept the recommendation for overview scrutiny. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item number 11. Now, Councillor Rawson is not here today, but we have the appropriate senior officer to talk us through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like permission to present this on behalf of Councillor Rawson. Chair, we opened up the core infrastructure on Infinity Park and the park itself in July. We then opened up the Innovation Hub, the first building on the park, in September. And Chair, that's 40% occupied already, which is really good news. This report seeks approval to carry out some further infrastructure works of a more modest scale on Infinity Park to help progress and accelerate the development of it. There are three elements to these infrastructure works, and they're briefly described in paragraph 1.1. The first one is to extend the highway itself, the T12 Phase 2 works as it's described. And what this does is takes the highway works to the rear of the Innovation Hub, so it opens up a chunk of land, about 6 acres or so of land, at the back of the Innovation Hub. That would be funded out of Local Growth Fund Round 1 funding. We already have planning consent for it and delivered by the Council. The second element of work is the installation of wayfinding and signage work on the park itself. And this is really about trying to improve the identity and the image of this new business park. That would be organised by the developer, who needs to seek planning consent, and will be part funded by a grant which the council administer. The money actually comes again from Local Growth Fund Round 1. And the third element of it is to relocate a small river on the park called Cuttle Brook. At the moment, that brook is effectively, it's culverted, it's a straight channel, and we will relocate it to the edge of the park. We will turn it into a wavy river with lots of ecological benefits. It will also open up more land for development, so it's positive. Again, that will be funded out of Local Growth Fund Round 3, but will be delivered by the Council. The first recommendation seeks approval to enter into all of the necessary contractual arrangements in order to deliver those three pieces of work. The second recommendation seeks approval to submit a hybrid planning application, and this is necessary for two reasons. Firstly, to proceed with Cuttle Brook, we do need a detailed consent, and that's necessary to do that. And the second reason is that we want to increase the headroom on the park for what we've described as B1 use, or office and small workshop use. Why do we need to do that? Because in fact the Innovation Hub has grabbed most of the planning headroom for that, and we want to increase the supply so that when we get inquiries, of which we're getting many, we can respond very favourably to them. And so the second recommendation seeks approval to prepare and submit a hybrid planning application to do that. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Holmes, please.
Just to say that it's great to see this project, its roots growing and the thing really taking shape. I know that Councillor Hickson, signing this off and being involved in the initial stages, is very proud of that decision. And this council and its officers are working very hard to make the most of this project. And what a project it is. I think it's further putting Derby on the map. and it's great to see. So I'd just like to congratulate officers and urge the Cabinet to press forward at a pace to make this one of the most productive hubs of its kind, if not the only productive hub of its kind in the region, maybe the UK.
Councillor Kerr, please.
Thank you. I was pleased also to see this moving forward, but I've slight words of caution as well as the enthusiasm. And you know, point 1.1 talks about accelerated development. Yes, we're pushing ahead with it. And I'm mindful as later reports we've got talking about the Council's financial situation and the importance of business rates will be to the Council as our grants from the government reduce. So ensuring that we've got businesses able to move in is going to be absolutely vital for our sustainability. That said, we've also got some key risks identified at 4.4, and some of them seem to me fairly fierce risks. And therefore, in the interpretation of the recommendations, particularly 2.1, I'm hoping that prior to those decisions, you know, that approval being given, there will be full consideration of the further work that is implied on the key risks in the bullet point at the top of page 9. That's not specifically alluded to in the recommendation, but I hope, Chair, that it will be taken as read or will be added into that recommendation before you approve it. One of Derby's other challenges, which isn't a financial one directly, is air quality. And therefore, I want to roll in to ensure that we have got a design going into this scheme that is going to maximise the use of non-powered transport, and so that we can address those air quality issues at the same time. There's no talk here about consultation either with Derbyshire Wildlife Trust about the design of the Cuttlebrook, and I very much welcome the opportunities that will bring for flooding and flood relief as well as for biodiversity. But I presume, and I certainly hope, that Derbyshire Wildlife Trust or an equivalent body will be involved in that design and its implementation. And likewise, I would hope that the Derby Cycling Group will be consulted about the layout of the site before the planning application goes in, because it's so much easier to change things before it's gone to planning. The provisional programme dates, I think, mixes some of the planning applications at different levels, and I think that don't follow that too closely. But let's move on. Let's move on with caution and care, not me. But and hope everything does line up and the funding comes in and the risks don't prove to be too challenging. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kerr's made some suggestions there. We can.
If I may respond, Chair, thank you for those comments. Firstly, I think we highlight the risks in the report because it's clearly implicit when we're making decisions and we manage or enter into contracts, we're aware of those. We don't normally identify every risk in the recommendation. So I hope it is read that it is implicit in the recommendation that there are risks and we will manage those. Secondly, sorry, this may not have been in the order, on cycling, we did consult and I forgot the cycling groups in the original planning application, and we will do so again in the second. Thank you, Chair. That is a very good point. And finally, in relation to the book, I don't think we've had recent consultation with Derbyshire Wildlife, but we have had a significant amount initially and with the Environment Agency, and we will reactivate that with Derbyshire Wildlife. I have to say, from an ecological point of view, everyone has absolutely loved the proposals because you turn this awful culvert, which is probably not quite the right language, it's a straight drainage line, into what it was originally, a meandering, wonderful river, with the ecological benefits that go with that. Thank you, Chair.
Any other contributions, questions for anyone?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I think this report is excellent news for this administration and for the hard work that officers have put in. What this report says is that Derby is open for business. With Brexit, with the isolationist stance that America might now take, with Trump being in charge, we face many challenges. And I certainly believe that the work that we've done with Rolls-Royce in terms of trying to cement their relationship here in the city, despite the challenges that Nissan and Toyota will face in months to come, I think this is an important step in trying to ensure that Derby remains on the map we get the jobs that we actually need, and we work with some of our major players like Rolls-Royce. I think also it complements the work that was done last week by the leader and the deputy leader over in China, who are reaching out, again, to make sure that that sign goes up around the rest of the world that Derby is open for business. We have the skills, we have the expertise, we have the vision. And so this report reflects that to me, so I certainly welcome it. In terms of Councillor Kerr, she talks about risks. Well, when you get up in the morning, Councillor Kerr, and you get out of your bed, life is a risk. But if we don't take risks, we'll just wither and die, so those risks are worth taking. On a lighter point, in terms of environmental issues, I did raise one because I can remember the problems that we had on the A38 when the Environment Agency came in and they suddenly found that there were crayfish that delayed the work by a number of months. So I've been reassured that there's no crayfish in the Cuttlebrook or no cuttle fishing in Cuttlebrook either. So superb report, Chair. I welcome it. Derby's open for business, and I think this reflects this administration and the officers helping us to ensure that happens. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Repton. You obviously mentioned the visit to China. We travelled 5,000 miles away to promote the excellent incentives that Infinity Park Derby offers businesses. And in fact, one of the senior executives at Rolls-Royce spoke at a panel to Chinese businesses and investors, singing the praises of what the council's achieved here and encouraging investors to take a look. So that's a big, big endorsement. And again, another example that, it's worth mentioning again, actually there are people around that kind of want to do Derby down all the time. Actually, we're getting on with the job serving the city and representing the city on the international stage. And when you've got endorsements, from Rolls-Royce, 5,000 miles away with some of the, the richest investors in the world, listening to that, that is a big endorsement. And it shows you actually don't listen to some of the nutters we've got on our own doorstep, especially around social media that seem to sit around all the time, putting the city down and the efforts of what the administration's doing. They need to smell the coffee and see what the likes of Rolls-Royce are saying, what, billionaire Chinese investors are talking about the city and the opportunities we're offering. And that's where the future lies. So just be careful what you listen to. So really big endorsements, great project going forward. And I've been very proud to be involved in it through its stages. And again, if I can pay tribute to my predecessor, Councillor Bayliss, that actually put together the plans that which then got us to a stage where we're now starting to build the site out. And let's look to the future. As Councillor Kerr's rightly said, there's a lot of work that still needs to go into this in terms of consulting some of our key stakeholders, and we'll take those suggestions forward. So real positive contribution from the Liberal Democrats and Councillor Kerr there. We're happy to support. Very appropriately spoken, Councillor Repton, so thank you very much for that. Now, before I put this to if there's no further contributors from anyone, before I put this to Cabinet, although the Corporate Scrutiny Governance Board made no recommendations to Council Cabinet, but they did commend the recommendations in the report. So again, really positive endorsement. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 12, Councillor Repton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it will be helpful to have a bit of a background information as to how we've come to the position in Derby, which is incredibly challenging, and I believe that over the last 12 months we've risen to that challenge to a large extent. Cuts to the housing-related support budget, formerly called the Supporting People Grant, were originally proposed in the budget setting exercise during autumn 2011 and again in 2013. This was following the announcement by Eric Pickles in 2009, who was the Communities and Local Government Minister at the time, that the former ring fence for the grant would now be removed and that all conditions were withdrawn. Well, we've seen what happened. You made reference, Chair, earlier, the incredible challenges that all councils have faced in this country, with budgets being slashed right to the bone. To give you an example, that the cuts to the housing-related support have been built into the Council's financial plans since 2012, with a final cut reducing the general fund contribution to nil. That's left us with a massive challenge. I'll just point out what the previous levels of spend have been. In 2012-13, we were spending £9.5 million almost. 2013-14, with the government cuts to our grants, this was down to 3.765 million. Again, with the government cuts biting deeper, 2015-16, 1.3 million. and now we're facing 0. We first looked at this in November 2015. At the time, the picture looked very bleak indeed. But I charged my officers to go out there, make sure that no stone was left unturned in terms of finding alternative sources of funding wherever we can for some of these valuable resources. And I have to say, I'm pleased with the amount of work and endeavour that they've put in, and that I've put in as well, over the last 12 months. And we've ensured, I believe, that we will be able to save a number of these services, such as the domestic violence refuge, the single homeless people provision at Milestone House, the single point of entry, and the work that took place with drug and alcohol at high intensity for adults. That obviously leaves challenges for the remaining 3 services, that's Action Housing to support high-risk offenders, Riverside Housing to support young people, and another service run by Action for drug users is planned to cease on the 1st of December. Where there is a washback on services, I believe that we'll be able to absorb some of the work within our existing services, particularly with the children's services. We'll absorb them with existing social care workloads. So the recommendations outlined, I think there's a way forward. I think we can save most of these services by alternative sources of funding that were found. The recommendations are to agree an 8-week public consultation exercise, commencing with immediate effect, as set out in sections 4.2 and 4.3, and to agree to receive a report on the consultation outcomes and analysis following an equalities impact assessment, so that Cabinet consider these before making a final decision. So I recommend these to Cabinet this evening, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Repton. Any questions or contributions from anyone? Okay, yeah, I'll take Mr. Youth Mayor, please.
2 questions on this. Firstly, I very much welcome the fact that some of these places will be able to continue to run. But I'm just wondering, are there any procedures being put in place to ensure that the ones that will continue to run with alternative funding will have the same quality of service? And the second question I have was around the Riverside young people, and if it would be possible, because obviously that works with young people aged between 16 and 18, whether it would be possible to involve Voices in Action, the Youth Council, as part of the consultation to see if young people had any thoughts on how this ending that service would affect, and it would fit, seeing as this year's theme is homelessness as well, and if there's anything else that can be done, suggested by young people.
Response, Chair. It's yes to both. We are assured of the quality of the alternative service that will be delivered by others, and yes, we will involve the organisation that you referred to earlier, so yes to both.
Councillor Kerr, please.
I'm sorry, Chair, that I don't have details of this, but I've heard reference to some government funding becoming available for domestic violence support and accommodation, provided that councils are working with their colleagues in other appropriate councils nearby. And I think it's to help make sure that if you're under threat in one area, you can then move to another area where you're not going to have the same sort of threats around you. I'm just asking that we check on that situation and make sure that if we need to start closer working with colleagues across borders, we are doing that so that we can access any funds that might become available. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr, another excellent suggestion. Thank you. Councillor Repton, would you like
Yes, I'll come back to that. I mean, certainly that's an important point that Councillor Kerr raises. I'm not sure sort of what the possibilities are of that, but that will be explored fully during the consultation process. Thank you.
And Councillor Kerr, have you got any information you could just pass over to Andy? That would be helpful in terms of, not necessarily now, but...
I will search for the tweet that I read.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, any other contributions, questions from anyone? Okay, okay. Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 13, the Q2 revenue budget monitoring. Cabinet are asked to note the forecast monitoring position for 2016-17 and the delivery of savings in year. The latest forecast position shows an overspend of just over 1 million, predominantly due to increasing costs in community-based adult care services and the rising costs of looked after and disabled children. The overall position is offset by some forecast savings in debt management and housing benefits recovery. Cabinet are also asked to approve the use of reserves in Section 5 of the report. It is currently forecast that 95% of savings identified for 2015-16 will be delivered in year, with the remainder to be delivered in future years. Officers continue to work to bring the final year end position into balance. Any questions? Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. There are many issues within this particular report, but I think they're best served to be taken to ordinary accounts, and so that's the mechanism I think that the opposition, the Conservative opposition, will be doing so. Could I ask, though, about some clarity on Queen's Leisure Centre? That's mentioned on item 6.3. We know the leader signed off emergency funds for the roof, and that work is either being completed or about to be completed, I understand. Could I ask, is there, do you feel or will there be a need for further funds to be signed off or agreed by the leader or the relevant cabinet member / cabinet in terms of moving forward with Queen's and having the facility fully open?
Councillor Holmes, we are dealing with assets which are immensely old. The most paramount issue here is the health and safety of service users. And again, you know, the condition of the building is not going to get any better. What we can only do at this stage is deal with the facts as they materialise following the assessments that have been undertaken. And again, you've got to bear in mind that obviously it's a massive structure we're dealing with over there that needs a significant amount of work. But the priority is the health and safety of children. So we, in the context of the fact that this administration has made a commitment to ensure that the city has a serviceable pool in the interim period while we go ahead and develop a new pool, and that's the exciting possibility here now, is that you know, under Labour we are going to build a new pool on the Moorway side. We've committed to do that. We are going to bring forward a time scale, so we will announce that to the public when work will start with a clear plan that will go towards delivering that new pool and an opening date. And I think the public are very keen to hear that news, and Councillor Shankar, as project manager, has been working very hard behind the scenes. In fact, he's been touring the pools across the country. I think he's become a bit of an expert at pools, coming excitedly back, feeding back what other cities are doing. So that knowledge and expertise that he's gained is being put to good use, so we can get on with building a new pool. So that's got to be the priority. We just need to get on and get more work started, get that pool open for the public. In the meantime, we want to make sure that the public have a pool offer available. And the way to look at it, actually, you know, if we didn't keep that pool open and spend what's needed to make sure that that pool remains safe, we can't just simply walk away from that building. You know, clearly we'd have an issue that people wouldn't have a serviceable pool in the interim period while we wait for more ways to be built. But it would also mean that actually we have an asset there that we still have to, you know, keep secure. It's in the heart of the city centre. A significant amount of costs would have to be spent in maintaining that building. You can't just leave it, you know, and walk away from it. And we are exploring actually looking at the future potential of that site. As I said, it's a prime city centre location. It is an asset to the council, and there will come a time when we are in a position to open more ways, where we'll need to have a real look about what the possibilities are for that site. There are all sorts of options. Just opposite, you've got student accommodation. The university is very ambitious with the support of this council in driving forward their plans to improve the offer for students in the city centre and not just in terms of the actual education's offer in the city centre, but also making sure students have a good accommodation. So one of the options could be that we could explore actually for the future of that site is you know, do we work with the university on utilising that site. So the point I'm making there is, that there is an asset there. We are investing in our own asset. And I think the days of the council selling off large tracts of asset, I think, are long gone. We've learned the lessons of how the Conservatives devastated asset sales in the city centre under, the then Tory government. Bus companies are a classic example. The Conservatives sold off huge assets in the city, and we're living with the consequences of that. So what we have left, I think we should retain. So investing in our asset as we're doing, to make sure that the public continue to have a decent, a safe place that they can swim in the interim period while we go ahead and start work on more ways. It makes sense, and actually exploring all the possibilities for that site. So I think the public can be rest assured that actually we're exploring every option.
Thank you. You haven't really answered the question, though. So the assumption from what you've just said is that there will be an expectation of more significant funds being agreed to deal with the issues at Queen Street Baths to have it fully opened. You can correct me if I'm wrong in that assumption from what you just said. And I would then lead on to, if that is the assumption and that does occur, wouldn't, in hindsight, have it been better to keep more ways open as the option, considering that Queen Street could actually cost significantly more?
I have answered your question. Thank you, Councillor Holmes. And you should try to take a note. I've answered those questions quite explicitly. Councillor Kerr, please.
Thank you. I want in no way to belittle the challenge that the Council is facing at the moment. And the year-on-year savings that are needing to be achieved now are greater than the year-on-year savings that needed to be achieved 8 years ago. It's never easy, but one of the priorities is to make sure that you are doing the utmost to actually achieve from as soon as possible in the financial year the things that have been agreed by Council. And I'm therefore disappointed that things like the education campaign for recycling has not been able to go ahead yet, that we aren't managing to deliver some of the things that are good for the environment and are involving our population as soon as we might have done. And I think that's the essence of it, really, that we need to be working not to provide services to the people of Derby, but to be working with the people of Derby to provide services. The majority of people, sort of comments you pick up on the street, letters to the paper, that sort of thing, people are still saying, it's the council's fault, the council is cutting. And I think what we're not getting through is to be able to work cooperatively. And it's in the same way as knowing that we need the foster carers coming from the population of Derby to look after Derby's children. There are many other examples where we need to be doing more for the people of Derby to feel that they are part of the solution rather than the user of services. There isn't, as I say, there isn't an easy option, and I know that people have been working really hard to do this. There are still challenges here. And I suppose my message really is to say, let's ask our staff at every level, make sure that they feel that they're not being pressured into finding solutions, but are being part of the solution themselves. And the same for the people of Derby. Well, we can look at paragraph 6.2, where we're saying that there is £200,000 is forecast to be achieved, but with no idea yet as to how that's going to be achieved. Or we can look at the delivery of education campaigns, the second bullet point under 6.3, which haven't happened, so we're not saving 177,000. We all know that reducing waste is the first step we ought to be doing, and we're not achieving that because we've not got the education campaign in place. because we've not employed the additional staff. It's easy to say that, and I know the department is desperately short of staff. But as the administration, it's something that falls in your laps, because that is the way the system works. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not blaming you, I'm just saying let's all try and pull together, and that includes all our staff and all across the people of Derby.
Okay, Councillor Kerr, I agree with the spirit of what you said there. I agree with the premises of what you're talking about there. But Councillor Kerr, you know, come back to what I said earlier on. We are fighting at times an uphill struggle. There are people that think everything's hunky-dory and everything's fine, and that what are you talking about? You're wash with money. You know, so-called austerity deniers. The Conservatives are an example of that. You know, they can't understand why services are being reduced. It's bizarre. They can't link up with what's happening nationally to what's happening in the council. So that's their issue. But you're absolutely right. We are trying to involve the public. Clearly, you know, that message does get distorted for many reasons. There is an acceptance, though, that the reality is there is a limitation to what the public is prepared to do and capable of doing. And that's why we are now finding ourselves in a situation we are exploring the basic services we believe the council has to be able to provide. There is a clear message we're getting through from the public that actually, you know, that yes, they will get involved in certain aspects, but actually they believe there's an expectation that what they believe their council should do for them. And I think we are at that stage now. We've just got to be able to say, well, actually, you know, there are certain services that we believe are absolutely, you know, sacrosanct. You know, school crossing patrols are one of them. You obviously talk about, you know, involving the public in education campaigns around the environment. You know, we will try all those things. You know, we have been trying all those things. In terms of your kind of saying, well, actually, it's the administration's responsibility, I would say it's a council responsibility. And come back to that point, it's easy, I'm not saying you yourself in this occasion, but it's easy for people to sit on the outside and say, well, actually, you know, everything, you know, the council should be doing X, Y, and Z. 6 years on, as a result of government cuts, you know, things are going to get harder and harder and harder. You know, we've got to find alternative ways of doing that. I think you've offered a hope there that actually we can work together. So I think, you know, if you are prepared to get involved in some projects, and we have talked about Council Care, we hold our regular meetings now. We've talked about, cycling, which is a passion for both you and me, and, you know, there's many councils here that are cyclists. We have talked about, the funding that we have secured and how we can work together on drawing up plans that actually can be really in the best interest of the city. So there is one example of how we are working together, and we'll continue to explore other ways. So I don't think there's any further contributions from anyone. So Cabinet to, I'm just looking at, there's no recommendations from Ovian Scrutiny. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, that's great, thank you. Okay, agenda item number 14, Q2 Capital Budget Monitoring 2016-17 to 2018-19. This report provides details of the Q2 Capital Programme position. It proposes change to the latest programme of 26.6 million, which are detailed in the paragraphs 4.5 to 4.13 and Appendix 2. The largest movement of 25 million relates to the delay in paying for the waste plant, which is now forecast to be paid in 2017-18. The recommendations are set out in the report. Councillor Holmes has obviously saved the best to last. So having not spoken on other critical aspects, he obviously likes the finance report. So I'm sure we're going to have loads of contributions here. So Councillor Holmes, please.
Just one, if I may, Chair, the page 8. I may have raised this in previous Cabinet meetings. In regards to the A52 congestion management, Christina or a relevant Cabinet member may be able to offer clarity. Obviously, there's some issues with the implementation of, or the proposals for the congestion management. Could we just have a recap of what those, what the congestion management proposals are at this stage, and why that means that they're currently higher than initially thought, please?
Yeah, we're actually preparing a report to bring to Cabinet the next meeting. Essentially, the A52 congestion management scheme looks at improving the exit from the A52 into Pride Park, as well as looking at increasing the number of lanes that are running on the A52 around that area. It looks at taking out the roundabout that's by Toys R Us and replacing it with a signalised junction. It also looks at incorporating a proposed Section 278 scheme with the Chaddeston Triangle development site to ensure that we make provision there. The scheme costs have increased. The estimated cost for the scheme is higher than it was originally because we've increased the scope of the scheme, having done further work on it. And at the moment, we are drawing together a whole range of funding proposals for that. So we expect to be reported to Cabinet that we will have secured or are expecting to secure additional funding from external sources towards that project. So hopefully at the next meeting there will be a fuller report, but that will be, you know, setting out how we would like to move forward with the scheme. We don't perceive that it won't, as officers we will be recommending that it goes ahead, but you know there are issues with big schemes like these.
Just Chair, just jump in. It wasn't the risk that it wouldn't go ahead, it was just the risk of potential cost to the council which I was most concerned of.
Okay, any further contribution? Councillor Kerr, please.
I'm interested in paragraph 4.8 and the delay to the waste plant, which sort of suggests it's a year away at the earliest. I recognise that you may not be able to say an enormous amount about what's actually happening because it may be confidential, but it'd be useful to have a briefing on that if it's possible at some point. But I'm particularly interested to know what the implications are for future waste costs, because we've been expecting that to be taking our waste at a given cost, and presumably it now won't be. So that must be being built into our medium-term plans, and I couldn't see it explicitly being brought out in those terms.
Yeah, Councillor Kerr, obviously we can give you a briefing separately to this on the details. What I would say is that our contract with our RRS is about the delivery of a service. So actually from the 1st of April 2017 we will pay the costs that we would have paid had the plant been open. So we're protected from that perspective even though the plant is delayed. Okay.
Any other questions or contributions from anyone? Okay. Okay, Cabinet to approve the recommendations set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, thank you. Item 15, Treasury Management Mid-Year Report 2016-17. Report outlines the Treasury Management activities for the first 6 months of this financial year. As outlined in the Revenue Monitoring Report, the forecast savings in borrowing costs of 2.7 million are as a result of changing the debt repayment profile over a number of years. The report also highlights the interest earned from investments which continue to remain very low due to the market conditions and the need to ensure that our operational cash remains safe. Any questions or contributions from anyone on this? Okay. Cabinet to approve the recommendation. Well, everybody now. So, yeah, started with Mr. Youth Mayor, please.
I'm just wondering, paragraph 7.1. It says that they were, in terms of the portfolio deposits, they were limited to certain institutions on the Council's approved lending lists. And I'm just wondering what sort of institutions these include.
Yes, Chair. The actual institutions will be in the Treasury Management Strategy, so that will be in the February report. But we're talking about mainstream banks, other local authorities, etc. So it's quite a tight group of institutes we can use, and certain levels of rating of those as well, as advised by our Treasury advisors, and that changes regularly depending on the status of those companies or banks.
Any further contributions? I think there was a few indications. No, that's okay. Okay, so the recommendations are moved. Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Thank you. Okay, the medium-term financial strategy, I'd like to bring in the Finance Director just to give a quick overview of this.
Thank you, Chair. The report sets out the scene for the budget strategy for the next 3 years. Resources remain very tight, and with further funding reductions forecast and increasing demands on our services. The current MTFP outlines the need to meet £45 million of savings, which still remain the basis for the next MTFP. The report highlights the national and local context, including Derby's relatively limited ability to raise resources through local taxation, and Derby also continues to be underfunded in comparison to its need to spend. We continue to lobby government through responses to their settlement consultation. As set out in the report, the strategy includes delivery against the current MTFP, progression of the Delivering Differently programme, a review of our Treasury management activities, working closely with other public sector bodies to find service and financial efficiencies, the additional 2% adult social care council tax precept in each of the 3 years, the commitment towards a new swim facility, a commitment to maintain the city's streets, parks and open spaces to an acceptable standard, to investigate crowdfunding to support community initiatives, and to protect statutory services and the most vulnerable in the community. The draft MTFP highlights further savings yet to be delivered, which we are working on prior to presenting a budget for public consultation in December. The timetable is shown in Table 2 on page 9. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kerr, please.
Thank you. This is the start of what will be a continuing process, as it always is. I just wanted to highlight, as has just been mentioned, paragraph 9.7 and investigating crowdfunding. And I'd like the Council to consider looking at not just crowdfunding, but enabling other bodies that are working with us, such as Friends of Parks and others, to be sourcing matched funding. And it's often a body that's not directly the council that can actually source that. So it may be community associations, it may be some of our sports clubs and things like that. But by providing the advice and the support and the encouragement, we may then get that money coming into the city. So I would hope that we can just expand 9.7 a little bit to gain that, not just the advice for what we can do and what people can do for us, but how we can help others. Thank you.
Okay, again, some really good suggestions there. In terms of crowdfunding, we are exploring that. As a leadership, we've mandated Councillor Amir Raju, who has really good voluntary sector experience, to lead on that piece of work for us. So he's working with officers to bring forward a set of proposals. But yeah, so your premise of what you're saying is absolutely spot on, and we are leading on that. So hopefully we'll be able to get together, put forward a set of proposals, and I'm happy to have a chat with you in advance of formally putting those proposals forward to see what your view is and see how we could tweak or improve them. So given clearly you're interested in that area. So any other further contributions, comments from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, so agenda item number 17. Okay, so Gordon, do you want to?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The Council scorecard focuses on our key performance measures, 43 in total, linked to the Council plan, pledges of safe, strong, ambitious and resilient. This report presents the latest performance monitoring data up to the end of September. At Q2, 70% of measures are on track to achieve their year-end targets. At Q2, we've demonstrated good performance in a number of areas, and these are outlined in the report. The appendices also set out details about further improvement actions that we're taking on red and amber indicators, and the report was considered by corporate scrutiny last night, including an update on homelessness. A mid-year review has been undertaken to make sure the scorecard remains up to date, and as part of this we've added a new measure on asset valuations. It is recommended for Cabinet to note the findings of the report, and in particular attention on underperforming measures as highlighted in Appendix 3. Thank you, Chair.
Cabinet to approve the recommendation set out in the report? Okay, sorry, okay, great. Agenda item number 18, Contract and Financial Procedures Matters Report. The report asks for approval to use additional funding to change the use of the reserves to widen the arena reserved for the whole leisure strategy, use a previous category management reserve to fund additional support for the communication service, use a former social care reserve which is deemed no longer required for its original purpose to support SEND reforms, and increase the economic partnership reserves of 168,000, of which 165,000 will fund Marketing Derby in 2017-18. Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. The job of a leader, the job of a cabinet, the job of an administration is to offer political steer to officers within a council and to drive those outcomes. It's also to lead from the front. It's also to be held accountable. It's also to put themselves forward to challenge on decisions that they make. 2.2, I believe that this administration and you as a leader are going to be hiding behind this role. I think that unless this has changed, you are refusing apparently to talk to at least one local media outlet, I think it's Radio Derby, is unacceptable. You need to change that policy, and I don't think you need this position to act as a firewall between you, the public, and the press. I think that you are making a mistake by bringing this person in. I think that you should lead from the front, and your colleagues should lead from the front, be able to deal with the media, deal with what communication, political communication is required from the decisions you make, and be open and transparent and not hide behind this role.
What a bizarre statement. I've sat here during the budget consultation with Ian Skye to the right of me, fielding questions for an hour without any preparation. So how can anybody say that we're not cooperating with the media? That's the most ludicrous assertion I've ever heard. The record of the administration in working closely with our media partners is exemplary. I mean, I can go back to, Shane O'Connor days, and nobody can tell me Shane was a shrinking violet. So anybody's been interviewed by Shane O'Connor, and I have to say I consider him an exemplary professional, and I enjoyed the jousting we did. Absolutely, and we continue to work with our closely on media. If they field questions, if we're available, we'll speak to them. But it's our right to if we're not available, to issue statements. So I just think that's a bizarre statement. I've never seen anybody considering me a shrinking violet when it comes to the media. You used to accuse me of fronting everything at one time. That what is it, bandwagon bandweight, and I got that reputation for being in the front of media at every opportunity. So what a bizarre statement to make, Councillor Holmes. In terms of this post itself, well, we just talked about earlier on how, this is an organisation with massive responsibility. You're talking about, on turnover terms, what, 600, I think Councillor Hussain and I were chatting about this, you're talking about £600 million. This will be a major corporation. Look at the capacity of a major corporation and how much it invests in the ability to communicate and get out its message and to consult and talk to the public. We are one of the most under-resourced local authorities in the East Midlands. Just look at the advice from the LGA, just look at the public interest report and the advice and recommendations set out there. Just look at other councils. You need to get out a bit, Councillor Holmes. I don't know how you spend your time. I know pushing trolleys around the hospital from what I hear, but you need to kind of get out a bit and just go along to Nottingham City Council. Go along to, you don't want to go to a Labour authority, go to, I can give you a list of Conservative leaders, including the leader of Solihull, the Conservative leader there, who I'm actually, when I was out in China, talking to him about the challenges we were facing, and he said, look, Ranjit, if you want me to speak to some of your Conservative counterparts to talk about the plight of local government, if the message isn't getting through, speak to me. I'll speak to them, no problem. We had a chat around various issues. So, I can provide you contact details. Just get out there, speak to other leaders. And again, if you look at the size and responsibilities, the statutory responsibilities that this council has, looked after children, providing adult social services. How can anybody say that a council, an organisation of this size, shouldn't invest in the ability to communicate and get out its message effectively? The reality is we are reliant upon certain ways of doing that. And the media, the transparent media we have, is an excellent way of doing that. But tell me a council, an organisation, that doesn't invest in its in ability to be able to kind of communicate effectively and get its message out there. You know, we do that. You know, we've just launched our own new site because that's what staff have asked for from the feedback we've had. That's proving very successful. But that's not at the to the expense or detriment of our colleagues out there in the media. We'll continue to work with them as much as we can, as we always have. This resource we're putting in there is because we have identified a gap clearly in our in our key messages, and we've talked about one of them. The fact that there are people out there that want to, for whatever reason, their own personal egos, want to distort the valuable work that the local authority does. So, having a resource that we can work with to say, well, these are the key messages, these are the key corporate messages that we want to be able to communicate to the public effectively, well, that's a legitimate way of doing that. I mean, you look at any organisation, whether it's Toyota, Rolls-Royce, major corporations and companies that do that, and actually, if you look at it, you could argue that actually the responsibility of the council is even bigger. Just look at your own Conservative government and the leaflets it put out on Brexit. I mean, how much did that cost? I'm not criticising that necessarily. That was made a public issue at the time. I'm sure we could FOI, the costs and expenditure of many Conservative councils out there, and the costs and the resources that they put in. Have you scrutinised that? If you're going on some kind of crusade and campaign against Derby, I'm assuming, logically, therefore, it must be a national crusade you're launching against any council, whether they be Labour, Conservative. Please show me the statistics. If you can evidence to me that Conservative councils don't spend anything on, equivalently, I accept you might have a point there. You haven't presented that. Your attacks are constantly, let's be honest, they're political, aren't they? I mean, this administration could not do anything to your satisfaction, and you will oppose anything we do. That's your job. You've set yourself in an absurdly stupid position of, I have to say, a bit of a thick opposition. Because, as I said to you earlier on, you pose everything without presenting an intelligent, well-thought-out alternative. And I have to say, guess where Councillor Hickson had a few marks over you. If you're not capable of doing that yourself, just maybe you need to get a different leader to do that job for you. Anybody can be in opposition. And I come back to this point again. If you want to speak to Conservative leaders, I'll line them up for you, my friend. I'll line them up for you. Because what they find actually absurd, because they're in a position of power themselves, is actually they think opposition, whether they be Conservative, Labour or whatever, can give opposition a bad name. Can give the party a bad name. So I come back to this point again, if you want to create an issue out of this, fine, you do that. You do your press releases, you write your letters to government ministers. There's a lot of things I know you do. That's what you do. I can't stop you from doing that. It's your way of doing that. But, this has come as absolutely makes sense. An organisation like this, we're communicating with people out there. People with very complex lives, children, service users. We've talked about foster carers. If this person could come in and help us better engage with the public on a service area of foster carers, well, we've talked about how important the service is. Have you read the report? Did you listen to anything that was said earlier on? Your view is very simple, is to cripple the administration's ability to get out its message. And you want to leave it, let's be honest, you want to leave it to some of the people that run social media out there. That's your view. You cooperate with them all the time. So your view is actually, kind of furnish them with all sorts of stories and messages from the council, but actually not leave us the ability to kind of communicate with the public ourselves. But let's make it clear, we're not shrinking violets. Nobody can accuse this. I've just been to China, for God's sake. I've just been signing a historic agreement in front of China News. And that reaches God knows how many millions of people. No disrespect to Radio Derby, more than Radio Derby listeners. we sat down with the editor of the Telegraph, and and they put a really important piece and coverage out about our trip to China. And similarly, we're talking to them about other important issues coming up. So to say to somebody like me, who's kind of built a reputation of talking, and I've been in all sorts of situations with the media, whether it's serving petitions or, whatever, to say we're somehow kind of hiding, and what a bizarre thing to say, Councillor Holmes. And one of the most absurd things I think you've ever said. Make your mind up. I mean, the Councillor Bandwagon, always fronting everything in the media. I mean, there was a joke, actually, I could brush my teeth and there'll be a press release on it. I have to say, it was the former editors of the Telegraph, and Steve Hall shares that review. Roger, you're always wanting to be on everything all the time. So I don't know. I find that very humorous, Councillor Holmes. But again, you are just the opposition at the end of the day, and that's the way you position yourself. So, as I said, I have the monitoring officer to the left of me that will always say to me, whose job and responsibility is make sure we make decisions properly and legally. So, she's been very calm throughout this exchange, no doubt thinking, I don't know what the fuss is about, can we go home please? So I think we are nearing that time, but Councillor Kerr, we found ourselves in agreement on a lot of things now. Let's just see what your view is here then.
Right, thank you. I was wanting to raise something about item under paragraphs 5 and also 6. Regarding 5, I think there needs to be a much clearer remit as to what is actually being tried to be achieved here. It refers to the consultant, it refers to 2 to 3 days per week, it talks about a potential of maybe only 6 months, and for £60,000 that's a full-time equivalent post of £250,000 a year, which is a lot of money to pay somebody. So we need to get something out of them. Alternatively, maybe some of this money is being spent not on the consultant but on something else. It certainly isn't clear from this what is being bought and what its aim is. And therefore, I would think that this needs something that whether scrutiny needs to look at it in more detail once a remit has been written, or audit and accounts need to scrutinise it. That said, the way that communications goes, it seems to be in cycles. Sometimes communications is done by the department, sometimes the communications is done corporately. We have been in a sort of corporate phase of doing communications, but we've seen things such as foster carers saying we'd like to do our communications more locally. Maybe waste management needs to do their communications more locally. So I'm thinking that some of this 60,000 is maybe best spent on doing some good training for some of our existing staff. Maybe some of them need to have a slight enhancement of what they're doing so that the communications is coming at a different level for specific items. Doesn't say what's happening within this. Somebody must have some view as to what's needed. I don't know what it is, but maybe there'll be some more information out in due course. But so far, I can't see it. Okay, second item is the use of the money for improving the SEND process. Absolutely right that it needs improving. There are too many parents, too many children who aren't getting the service they need, and I'm really pleased that this is being highlighted as something that's going to be targeted. I am, however, concerned that it's something where it's just to throw money at, but not to throw cents at. We may end up with more dissatisfaction because parents are not, and children in some cases, are not being fully involved in the process, and that we're ending up with the schools not being able to know what they're supposed to be doing because they are not, in some cases I'm told that children have not actually been identified with a specific mainstream school but are just being told you will be going to a mainstream school. It's no good to the school that's going to receive them if they aren't named. And we need to make sure that as part of this process we are providing a high quality service and not jumping through a tick box process. So I'm pleased the money's coming in. Let's just make sure that it really does the job properly.
Okay, thank you for that. It's worth pointing out in terms of any costs going to be incurred in terms of any vacancies, and obviously you've talked about the consultant one, worth reminding that this administration has reduced the senior management team to save nearly £1 million. Okay, so that's a fact. I know some people might want to distort that message, but the Monetary Office seems to accept that, whether other people do. So, we've done that, but the reality is, we, as a consequence, now have one of the leanest management teams in the country. And the advice we've received through our contacts in the LGA, we are a very, very, we've got to be very careful there. We are actually on a comparable level in terms of our management, comparable to a district authority. So there are always risks. Reducing management, yes, we've got to have a management structure that reflects the fact that this is a shrinking organisation, but if you take it too deeply, it can have its consequences. And I think we have taken that bold decision to reduce management, because clearly, the workforce was being reduced. We've done that, but certain gaps have been created. And our ability, I'll come back to that point again, in terms of getting out our key messages, corporate messages, and I've used the important foster carer service. We all recognise that's an important service area. We all keep talking about how we can promote it better. An organisation like this having the ability to get out its key corporate messages and working closely with external partners absolutely makes sense. We do that now anyway. I think there's room for improvement, and getting somebody in to give us the expert advice on how we could do it better, so we can reach out and communicate the service offer we've got, and try to identify, as I said, for example, I've used this as an example of finding foster carers, been able to communicate the service offer we've got to very, very vulnerable communities that don't have the usual ways of getting that, of understanding what the local authority is doing, don't have access to that information all the time. How can we, now more than ever before, we've got to find creative, innovative ways of reaching to some of our hard-to-reach communities, and that's all we're trying to do here. But in terms of, just rest assure you, in terms of where the costs will come from, it will come from the £1 million savings that this administration's already made, Councillor Kerr. In terms of your other points, we're happy to take on board that feedback. So I'm going to move this on, because I think we've kind of debated this well. From Cabinet, is any contributions, comments from anyone? Okay. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations are set out. Oh, beg your pardon. There are some Corporate Scrutiny and Governance Board recommendations to Council Cabinet. The first one is further consideration should be given to the transfer and use of reserves to employ consultants given the current financial position of the Council, and that the decision to employ consultants to deliver work for the Council should be backed up by a clear and transparent information on current levels of budget and staffing to deliver the existing service, the outlining of issues and clear reasons for requiring a consultant to deliver services, clear outcomes and key deliverables, clear and defined timescales for delivery, and details of how the outcomes and performances will be scrutinised and monitored. Jenny, do you have any advice to offer on that?
No. No, Chair. I mean, the Council does have a procurement route for consultants. We'll take these recommendations, if they're accepted, this evening to the Procurement Board. We'll work with the procurement team to see about application should Cabinet choose to support the recommendation from scrutiny. Clearly, that's the Cabinet's decision as to whether they're accepted or not.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out that there is become, and Derby's no exception. All councils are in this situation. The reality is, when your revenue is under pressure, the next best thing is, if you are going to, you need to bring a service offer in. This is one way of doing that. It's not the most desired position. I wish we could, be the first point of, permanent employment. But again, it's the consequences of the need to deliver balanced budgets and the savings that we have to implement as a result of the national government policy. So the reality is this will be a temporary role that we will look to bring in. So I've put that to along with this and other aspects in the report to Cabinet. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, that's approved. Thank you.